Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Nina and today we're gonna have a look at what happens if you take a week, a month or even a year off from training. There are many reasons why you can't train for a certain period of time, for example a week or two, because maybe you're just very busy and you can't make your workouts fit into this week. Or maybe you're going on a 2-week vacation and you can't bother going to the gym during that time. Maybe you're injured or ill and you need that time to rest and recover. Or maybe gyms are closed because of the ongoing pandemic. Whatever the reasons for taking a break from training, many people seem to fear that this will cost them their hard-earned strength and muscle gains. However, today we're going to have a look at if this is really true and if this fear is actually warranted, given the scientific literature and what we know about taking some time off from training. But before we start, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and also consider subscribing to my channel. But now, having said this, let's dive straight into it. Let's first have a look at a scenario that is probably realistic for most people, which is taking a break for less than a month. For example, because you go on a 2-week vacation. The good thing is, nothing will really happen to both strength and muscle mass. But let me explain. In a small study by Ogasawara and colleagues conducted in 2018, young untrained men were split into 2 groups. One group was training continuously for 24 weeks, and they called this group the Continuous Training Group, or CTR. The other group trained intermittently for 6 weeks before taking a 3-week training break, then going back to training for 6 weeks again before taking another 3-week break, etc. They also trained for a total duration of 24 weeks, and they called this group the Periodic Training Group, or PTR group. The Continuous Training Group saw progressive increases in both strength and size gain, as measured by the 1 rep max on the bench press and muscle cross-sectional area on the pecs. However, the group that alternated between taking a break and then training again and taking another break, they saw similar increases in both strength and size while training. However, both of these measurements went down slightly when they took a 3-week break. However, after the total study duration of 24 weeks, both groups ended up having gained the same amount of muscle mass and gained the same amount of strength. These results suggest that taking an occasional training break of up to 3 weeks does not impact your strength and size gains in any way in the long run. Similar conclusions were found by another study conducted by Huang and colleagues in 2017, which included 20 men with previous weightlifting experience. What they found is that after a 2-week break, the total lean body mass, meaning the muscle tissue of the participants, and muscle cross-sectional area remained the same as compared to before the break. While these 2 studies were rather small and only included men, there are 2 meta-analyses that came to similar conclusions. These 2 studies looked at a grand total of 42 studies, and these studies included a larger number of participants, but also a greater diversity of participants, meaning they also included women and the elderly. These 2 meta-analyses found that when taking off for less than a month from training, your muscle cross-sectional area will decrease a little bit by around 8 to 10%. However, strength will more or less remain the same as measured by the 1 rep maxes on the bench press and the squat. Taken together, these results suggest that strength doesn't decline over a 4-week training break. However, these studies showed somewhat mixed results when it comes to the loss of muscle mass, as some studies did not find a decrease in muscle cross-sectional area, taking a break of up to 4 weeks, while others did. It is important to know that muscle tissue does not simply consist of muscle fibers. It's long been known that glycogen, which is a long-chain carbohydrate, is also stored in muscle tissue and functions as an energy reserve, especially during strenuous and intense exercise. It is therefore not surprising that the synthesis and the storage of glycogen is reduced when we take a break from training. And in fact, muscle glycogen levels can be reduced by up to 20% even after 1 week of taking off from training. Moreover, 1 gram of glycogen can store up to 4 grams of water, meaning that when you train and exercise regularly, you will have plenty of glycogen stored in your muscle, but that also means that there's a lot of water retained within your muscle tissue, and that also adds to the weight of your muscle and also to the size. On the other hand, when you then take a break from training, muscle glycogen levels are reduced, and so is the water that comes with it, which means that when you take a break from training, your muscles will automatically look smaller. On top of that, resistance training causes small-scale damage to your muscle fibers, which is actually a good thing and needed for muscle growth. However, this micro damage can recruit immune cells and also fluids into the muscle, which make them even look bigger after you work out. And if you then take a break from training, that inflammation will eventually subside and the muscle will look smaller. Therefore, the loss in muscle size when you take a break from training is most likely due to reduced glycogen levels and therefore also reduced water levels in the muscle, and also because of reduced inflammation, which both cause the muscle to look smaller when it actually is just as big as it was before. Taking a break from training for more than a month is probably not something that you do very often. However, in some cases it's necessary, for example, when you recover from an injury that takes more than a month to heal. So let's have a look what happens to both your muscle mass and your strength if you take a break for longer than a month. Unfortunately, your muscle mass will be one of the first things to vanish very quickly. In a small 2018 study, 20 untrained men had to resistance train for 11 weeks before they took a training break of 6 weeks. During this training phase, the quadriceps cross-sectional area of the participants increased by 9 to 16%. However, the cross-sectional area also declined to original levels when they took the 6-week training break. This finding was supported by yet another randomized controlled trial conducted in 2006, in which participants resistance trained for 8 weeks before taking an equally long training break. And similarly as before, the participants gained a substantial amount of muscle mass during the 8-week training phase, but lost almost half of their muscle mass when they took the 8-week break. Taking an even longer break of more than 2 months certainly doesn't add muscle mass or prevent its loss either. In yet another randomized controlled trials, men and females were put on a resistance training regime for 24 weeks. After that, they took an equally long training break of also 24 weeks, and what the study found is that overall the participants gained around 7% of muscle mass during these 24-week training phase, but lost almost all of it when they were resting for another 24 weeks. The muscle loss after these prolonged training breaks can certainly also be attributed to less glycogen levels in the muscle and therefore less water retention. Nonetheless, because of the long duration of these training breaks, muscle protein breakdown and therefore true muscle tissue loss is also likely to have happened. So in summary, if you cannot work out for more than a month, it's most likely that you will lose a substantial amount of muscle mass. However, in all of these studies, the participants' muscle mass only returned to baseline, meaning that your most recent gains might be lost. You will certainly not lose all of your muscle mass. Interestingly, when it comes to strength, things do not look as bad as with muscle mass. In the same 2018 study I mentioned before, the participants were able to increase their 1 rep max by about 50% during the 11-week training phase, but did not lose their strength over the 6-week training break. In slight contrast, a more recent study in middle-aged men and women found that the 5 repetition max increased by 46 to 52% over a 12-week training period, but was reduced by around 15% after a 12-week training break. However, it's important to note that although the participants lost some strength over this 12-week period, they were still stronger as they were before. A similar pattern was also found by Häkkinen and colleagues in 2000. In their study, the participants increased their 1 rep max by 23 to 29% over a half-year training period, but only lost about 4 to 6% of their strength over an equally long half-year training break. When we take all these studies together, it seems that strength is much better preserved than muscle mass when we take longer breaks from training. And this is probably because strength is not only a function of muscle mass, but it has also to do with neural adaptations. And while muscle mass declines over time, especially the longer your training break gets, these neural adaptations are preserved for much longer. And this is why you will not lose strength as quickly as muscle mass. Muscle growth and muscle loss are the direct results of the fine balance between muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown. If the balance is shifted towards muscle protein synthesis, you gain muscle, whereas you lose muscle when the balance is more in favor of muscle protein breakdown. Probably the best stimulus for muscle protein synthesis and therefore muscle growth is resistance training. But is there anything else that we can do to prevent muscle loss, or at least reduce the speed of muscle loss when we're on a training break? And the answer is yes. Although the studies I mentioned before didn't specifically control for what the participants were eating, your diet is certainly a very important factor when it comes to both muscle growth and muscle loss. A 2019 review by Slater and colleagues showed that an energy surplus on its own can stimulate muscle protein synthesis, independent of weight training. However, the muscle gain from eating too much is small, and overeating in the absence of resistance training will probably lead to more fat gain than muscle gain. On the other hand, eating too little will certainly not help keeping your muscle mass either. In a small 2010 study by Pasiakos and colleagues, they put healthy young volunteers on a 20% caloric deficit. After 10 days, the muscle protein synthesis in these participants was reduced by around 16% as compared to the beginning. Therefore, eating at maintenance calories or even in a slight surplus seems to be optimal for preventing or slowing down muscle loss during a training break. But eating enough calories is only half of the equation. The other half is protein intake. Consumption of a high protein meal can in fact stimulate short bursts of muscle protein synthesis on its own. And since muscle protein synthesis depends on amino acids, which are the components of proteins, enough protein might slow down the loss of muscle mass during training breaks. How much protein you should eat every day is still somewhat of a debate in the scientific community. However, a rough ballpark for those eating at maintenance calories is around 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. So for a person weighing 65 kilograms, that would make around 104 to 143 grams of protein each day. But even with the most optimal nutrition, if you abstain from exercising for long periods, you will eventually lose some muscle mass and also strength. I know this sounds disheartening, but I promise that you will gain back muscle mass much quicker after a training break than it took you in the first place to build it. This is because of a phenomenon called muscle memory. Muscle memory describes a process in which muscle fibers remember hypertrophy. That means that muscle fibers that lost their size due to a training break remember that they have been bigger before. And because of this memory, old muscle fibers will regain their size much quicker than new fibers. The textbook mechanism for this functions as follows. For a muscle to grow, satellite cells, which are a type of muscle stem cell, multiply themselves and then fuse with existing muscle fibers, thereby adding both volume and myonuclei to the cell. Myonuclei contain our DNA and therefore the blueprints to produce protein, including muscle protein. And it is believed that the more myonuclei you have in your muscle fibers, the more protein they can synthesize and the bigger they are. These myonuclei will stay in your muscle fibers even if you take a long break from training. Some scientists even think that myonuclei stick around for 15 years or even longer. Once you start training again, you benefit from increased muscle protein synthesis and increased muscle growth due to an increased number of myonuclei. To give you an example for this, Seaborn and colleagues conducted a study in which untrained young men were put on a resistance training program for 7 weeks, which they called the loading phase. After that, these men took a 7-week break from training before training again for yet another 7 weeks. And after having watched my video thus far, you can probably guess the first part of their findings, which is that the participants gained a lot of muscle mass during these initial 7 weeks, but almost lost all of it in the 7-week training break. However, the interesting part comes when looking at the reloading phase, or the phase when they trained again after the break. Because during that phase, the participants not only gained all of their muscle mass back, but they even gained more muscle mass than in the initial training phase, meaning that they gained their lost muscle mass back much quicker. As this study also found, there also seem to be other mechanisms involved in muscle memory than just myonuclear retention, such as epigenetics, for example. But no matter the mechanism, the important thing to remember is that muscle memory will help you regain lost muscle mass after a training break much quicker than it took you in the first place to build it. How fast that will happen depends on several factors, such as your genetics, how long your training break was, and how much of lifting experience you had before the training break. As a rough estimate, you can expect to gain your strength back in about half the time than you took off from training. Meaning if you took a 4-month break from training, you will need about 2 months to gain it all back. Now, having heard all this, I hope you lost your fear from taking off a week or 2 from training when you actually need it. In fact, you can take up to 4 weeks off from training and will not significantly lose muscle mass or strength. Of course, consistency is key when it comes to building muscle and gaining strength, but life just gets in the way sometimes. And in these situations, it's better to take an extra week or 2 off from training and focus on what's really important in that current situation. Be it work or studying for exams or taking some extra time to heal and recover both physically and mentally. And if anything, you'll probably come back stronger, more motivated and well rested than you were before. So, and that was it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video or learned something new. And if you did, then please give me a thumbs up. Also consider subscribing to my channel if you want to see more videos like this in the future, and click the little notification bell next to it so you get notified when I upload a new video. And yeah, thanks again for watching. It really means a lot to me. I hope you have a nice day and see you in the next video. Bye!